I initially realized I have no supply. The people who buy and sell Beanie Babies actually aren't looking to buy and sell cars. And the strategy was initially to start with the ineffective part of the industry and move towards the inefficient part. Start with collector cars, go to kind of exotics, highline, and then average cars. And the strategy I labeled when I did my very first version of this before we launched was race to the beige Honda Accord. The bigger you want to be, the smaller you need to start. You find the greatest pain point, not the biggest pain point, the greatest magnitude of pain. You enter by solving people's pain, because what you'll find is the more pain people have, the more they're willing to overcome friction. You want the pain of the customer to kind of overcome the fact that the product is not amazing, and you need to drive in. And once you've earned the right and you've created a customer and you've solved a problem, you've earned the right to make the product better, to solve broader problems for broader people. First launch, the autos was okay, but like we said, it was a very stripped down MVP. Then we launched eBay Motors with the Vanda URL and kind of the core infrastructure and pricing and user experience, all the kind of core stuff that I felt made it possible. But at that point, it still wasn't probable. And all of roughly the same time, the numbers and the type of car started to shift, and the people who were buying stopped being car people and started being regular people. They were buying the beige Honda Accord. As much as I dislike the beige Honda Accord, and it's not my kind of car, I could not be more thrilled to see people buying the car. I fell in love with the beige Honda Accord.
Greylock's effort of $100 million put into marketplaces over the next few years. What are the top qualities or indicators that you look for in emerging online marketplaces at this time?
So you have to divide marketplaces into two, either the ones that are already scaling and have some liquidity, and those marketplaces, kind of a numbers exercise, you look at very carefully. But the vast majority of investments Greylock makes, which I think last fund was like 84% were early stage, and the vast majority of marketplaces exist or earlier, right? And so for those, you look at a few things. The first, is there a big and broken market, right? Everyone looks at big markets and you want to see something that's tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, but you also want to see something that is broken. An experience that doesn't work, a lot of rents that are absorbed by the supply chain so that costs are very high, selection that is modest, it's not comprehensive. Something has to be broken. The second thing is you really want a team that's outstanding, and everyone wants a rock star kind of founding team, but I tend to look for some team that has a passion for the space, something that maybe is an emotional connection to the space, or kind of an irrational focus on the problem. And lastly, is the marketplace structured well in a way that you don't want to have to shift too much as it's growing. So you want to make sure it's starting out in a pretty good place.
We have a picture here. This is a picture that you haven't shared with many people in the world. I think this is the first time you're sharing it publicly. This is where it all began for you. So why don't you tell us the story of this picture and how House started?
Yeah, that's a little bit embarrassing, but that's our house. It's a ranch house from 1955. We moved into this house with big, big dreams, how wonderful it's going to be to renovate it, modernize it, and create our dream home. My husband and I had real hopes that the process is going to be a lot of fun, and it ended up being pretty much a nightmare. So from finding the right inspiration of how to modernize it, to finding great professionals to help us execute on that front, finding cool products, it just wasn't fun. We spent a lot of time, money, and energy just to get plans we didn't like, professionals that didn't understand what we wanted. And then House was born because of that frustration. We shared it with people from our community. House actually started as a pet project when we wanted to remodel this house. And 20 parents from our kids' school and a few local architects and designers from the Bay Area started talking to us. And it looks like we're not the only crazy ones. People are frustrated. And that was a pretty untouched industry. with a lot to do, and we just figure out, let's start doing it.
So house started out as a side project for you, a pet project, project out of passion. When did it stop being that and becoming a real company for you?
I think that at the point, we started getting great reception from the community. It started growing organically by word of mouth. Professionals in the Bay Area would tell their friends out of the Bay Area and tell their clients. Our friends started telling their friends. Professionals would introduce their clients. So it definitely grew really fast. But
to get vendors on board and actually, build this thing?
Well, House actually grew organically, word of mouth. It started as a pet project that Alon, my husband, and I created to help ourselves. It started in the Bay Area. So 2 small groups, architects and designers in the Bay Area, and homeowners, our actually friends from the kids' school that were also remodeling at the same time, started working with each other and collaborating, and then it expanded and took life of its own. Okay. And more professionals joined, different professionals, contractors, builders, kitchen and bath builders, and homeowners from other states and out of United States as well. And it just grew like this.
Okay. So, but I feel like the market's very fragmented when you talk about all these professionals. Is there anything that you did, from a company perspective to bring them on board, or was it literally just, you had homeowners in certain states and then, architects and designers just showed up?
It was interesting to see the way people learned about it, word of mouth, because many times professionals would tell their peers in other states, and we would get an email, hey, we are kitchen and bath builders, you don't have a category for us, would you open one for us too? Or we are architects from Chicago, but you don't have the Chicago metro area, would you mind opening one in Chicago too? So professionals would tell their colleagues in other states, and they would also tell their clients about it and told them go and use the site and create idea books and participate in discussions and collaborate there. And then homeowners told professionals that didn't know about it and told them, why is your portfolio not on House and you should be part of it? And they told each other as well. So we had it growing in all directions. Okay. It was very interesting to see.
And we're in San Francisco, he's like, it's hard to get a freaking taxi. Like, it's hard to get a taxi in San Francisco.
Impossible.
You're stranded, game over.
Yeah, it's not New York.
And he's like, why don't we just buy a few limos, hire a few drivers, and, have a little iPhone app where we can just push a button and a car appears in 5 minutes.
Great idea.
And, oh yeah, we'd of course have to have a parking garage too, right?
Yeah, of course you do.
So it started out as like, let's do this lifestyle business.
It was basically like, let's share a driver.
Yeah.
It was like a jet share. Timeshare for drivers.
And I'm like,
it's a genius idea.
He calls me at some point, like we'd been riffing on this for a while. He calls me, he's like, Travis, I've got the papers for the parking garage. I'm like, don't do it. Don't do it, because I was just very against owning the assets, hiring the drivers.
Right.
Parking garage. What I like to say is that Uber is very classy and it's very efficient.
Right.
Garrett brings the classy and elegance, like that's his part of it.
Yeah.
I bring the efficient.
The value.
I bring the gnarly math efficiency sort of aspect to the business.
Well, and the business is what?
The business is on-demand town car service. Like I push a button on my iPhone or Android or even SMS. I push a button and in 5 minutes a car appears. I can see it coming. Romantic shot of me and my co-founder in front of the Eiffel Tower. We couldn't get a taxi. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced taxis in Paris, but it can be difficult. And my co-founder was like, I'd just like to push a button and get a ride. And so we just decided to make that. And so it was really simple. Well, at least once you build all the technology, is the consumer gets an app in the App Store, they open it up, they can see the cars that are close to them. They push a button, they see the car coming to them, and when it arrives, they're notified. They get in the car, because they already are a user, their credit card is on file, and when they get to the destination, they just walk out of the car. At the end of the trip, you see how much you paid, and you can also rate the driver on 5 stars. Of course, that's how we keep the service levels high, and both sides actually get rated, which keeps both sides accountable. And we have this internal tool that we call GodView. And operationally, we need to make sure we see all the trips that are happening at any given time. This was super early in San Francisco. I remember this is a Friday night, and 4 trips were happening at once, and a couple of us were running around the office like super pumped, like, oh my God, there's 4 trips going, this is amazing. And those are the early days, but it always starts small. Right? So Uber has an operations team and an office in every city that we're in. And this starts working for a few people, and they tell their friends, and their friends tell theirs. This is London yesterday. Just a quick zoom in on what's going on. And to make this work for hundreds of thousands or millions of people in a city means you have a lot of cars on the road. When you have a lot of cars on the road that are doing potentially dozens of trips a day, you're actually taking a whole bunch of cars off the road. In fact, in our current model here in London, there's 7.5 cars taken off the road for every fully utilized Uber that's on the road. And of course, choice is part of that, right? When we first started in London, we had a very high-end service. We call it Uber Lux. Little more than a black cab, probably 20 or 30% more. Usually an S-Class extended for the car geeks in the house. But we also have other choices, right? We have black cabs, of course, on the system. And we also, of course, have UberX, which is our low-cost alternative, which is about half the price of a black cab.
Like two metric ship tons.
I don't know.
Do you have any numbers that aren't made up?
How about this? We're doing hundreds of thousands. We have drivers, drivers and limo companies, essentially sedan companies, connected to our system. And we're doing hundreds of thousands of hours a week. We are paying...
In what city? Just in one
just
city?
Overall.
Okay.
We are paying drivers, or limo companies and their drivers, millions of dollars a week, right? Like, we are growing 26% month over month, and that means in the last 12 months, we are 16 times bigger than we were 12 months ago. And right now, the numbers are accelerating.
Kickstarter was an idea that I had when I wanted to throw a show, a concert, when I was living in New Orleans, Louisiana. I thought it was going to be a great show. I called the artists and tried to figure out how to make it happen, but it was going to cost a lot of money, and in the end, it just didn't come together. And I just was really bothered by this. I thought, there should be a way. Then the idea kind of came of, well, why couldn't the internet, why couldn't the audience have a say in bringing this to life? Why did I have to decide alone? And so that was the original idea. From there, it took maybe 7 years before the site actually opened. And that was just a lot of trying to figure out how to make it happen and figuring out people along the way to help me. And in 2009, about 7 or 8 years after the original idea, and now in New York, in April, we opened the doors and we launched the website. We didn't even have an office. I was sitting in my living room, my other 2 co-founders we were on Skype. One was had moved to Chicago, so he could go get some work. And then we turned it on. And at that point, it had been so long a process, and that at that point the goal shifted from creating something that was going to be like the dream was no longer like that this is going to be this amazing thing. It was just, I just wanted to go live, so that people believe me that I was working on something for all these years. And so when we went live, and there was maybe a few projects raising money. I mean, we put projects, our own projects, and we had some friends put projects. And the internet kind of started to work. And then a day later, there was 2 projects from people we didn't know. And then a couple of days later, 3. And it just slowly started to happen. where people were putting projects up and small amounts, couple $100, and it built, and so then we were a real company. It started to work enough to where people were like, hey.
Tops off.
We came up with Kickstarter eventually, and so from that point we were really working in earnest on it for a while, but we didn't have the tech team to do it, and we didn't have much at all. We were just a couple guys with a weird idea.
So what are you doing? Just putting up web pages, like HTML static pages?
Nothing. We couldn't get anything built.
Wow. So you're 2 or 3 years into this idea, and you've got nothing.
And we've got nothing, and it was challenging. We'd raised a little bit of money from some friends and family. Basically, the people who were willing to give us money. Interestingly, were all people who were artists. So our very first investor was the comedian David Cross, who was in Arrested Development and Mr. Show, all these things. Of course, yeah. So he liked the idea. The publisher of Pitchfork was an investor. A couple guys in bands that we liked invested. We were just
so you
randomly
crowdsourced
pitching.
The funding of the company.
We really did.
And had no success.
We had eventually there was success.
What was the first success?
I would say things started turning for us. I mean, we spent a lot of that time thinking about how this should work and formulating a lot of ideas. We had plenty of that time. And I would say in 2008, we managed to meet a woman named Sunny Bates, who's the most connected woman in New York.
Incredible recruiter.
Yeah. She lived in the apartment building of a friend of Perry's from college, who was an early investor. So he was like, "You should meet this woman."
Yeah.
We
She's
did.
a force.
She's a force. She took us under her wing and introduced us to people, and then we were able to start realizing the things that we didn't know that we needed to know.
Got it.
And then finally, April 28th, 2009, the site launched. There was no big launch or anything. There was just a web page where there hadn't been one before. And to get it started, we just gave our friends a couple invites, just create projects, and that was it. And so we started.
It took off.
Yeah, it took off. Not immediately, but it built pretty steadily.
What were the size of the projects back then, and what was the nature of the project?
The very first project was to build a Wikipedia app that was trying to raise $100.
$100 for a Wikipedia app.
Yeah, to build a Wikipedia app, basically to pay the Apple, the Apple feed, whatever, from putting your application in. That was the first project that raised this funding. The second one was a $35 project for a guy who just wanted to draw pictures for people. Very, very simple. The first project that really said to us, this could be something important, or this could work, was by a woman named Alison Weiss, who is a singer-songwriter from Athens, Georgia, and she basically created this video where she talks through all the reasons why you should support her project. And they were like, "You like me. I promise it won't suck." And all these things, it's just very honest.
Was that the first video?
There had been other videos, but that one created the template that people still use now. And that launched the second week of Kickstarter. And the project went up. She's trying to raise $2,000, and she gave herself 60 days to do it. And within 8 hours, she'd raised the full amount. We'd never seen anything like that before.
But she had a mailing list.
She had a mailing list. She was an established person on Tumblr and just on the internet. And before that point, all of our project widgets, when they show percent funded, maxed out at 100% because we thought, why would we need to show over 100%? And suddenly she was 200% funded within like a couple days.
And you're like, why not?
Well, we've got to show that now.
Show that. Make a double album.
So we really learned a lot from her, and so did the rest of our community. So I think that project was one that was really important. Another one was by Andy Baio, who is an advisor to us and was part of our team. He did one that was an 8-bit chiptune cover of Miles Davis' "Kind of Blue." That was like a nice internet-y kind of project.
Sure.
And we had just blips like that of people doing really interesting things that spread the word just a little bit. And what we found at that time was that when someone starts a project, the first thing they do is they tell their friends, and within their friends there are 5 other people who have things they want to do.
So it's viral by design.
By design and by luck. I mean, I think we'd hoped it would work that way. You can't count on something like that.
Well, I mean, if you're bringing in artists who do curate a mailing list, do have social media, they're going to bring something to the table.
This is true.
And would this idea have worked prior to social media, prior to Twitter and Facebook, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, we were gambling on it. When we were starting in 2005, there wasn't Twitter. There wasn't, I don't know if Facebook was around, and we didn't know about it.
No, not for you.
It wasn't really YouTube.
Not for non-EDUs.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure how we expected word to get out in those pre-social media days, but obviously it's hugely important to us now.
Yeah.
It's the backbone of a lot of what happens.
at this point, we were in debt and we had to figure out a way to pay our rent. The Democratic National Convention had come. We filled up like about 80 people staying at Airbnb. And then the week after the convention, it was kind of back to zero. And I had this revelation: if only there were political conventions every week, we'd have like an amazing business. But now what do? We built this website. We've been spending a year on it. No one's using it. It was a chicken and egg problem. No one wanted to come to Airbnb and list their homes because there were no travelers. No travelers wanted to come to a website where there were no homes. And by the way, this was like a social experiment, right? Like, no one wants to be the first person to try an idea like this. You're like, oh, I wonder if this is a good idea. I'll be the guinea pig. No one wanted to be that person to figure out if this was actually a good idea. Most people thought it was insane. And we had no way to get critical mass or network effects. So how do you get a network of critical mass in cities all over the world? We're in 34,000 cities.
And we were all roommates at one time. We lived here in San Francisco, this apartment. And in October of 2007, the rent on this apartment was increased 25%. And I and another roommate decided we had had enough and I was moving out. So Brian, who was not yet living in the apartment, he was in Los Angeles. Joe called Brian and said, why don't you come to San Francisco to be an entrepreneur? So Brian quit his job in Los Angeles, drove to San Francisco, and upon arrival was told that the rent would be $1,150. But Brian only had $1,000 in his bank account and had just quit his job. So he had a math problem. So the two of them are both designers, and it just so happened that there was a design conference that was coming to San Francisco the following weekend. And they got the idea to rent out one of the extra bedrooms as a bed and breakfast. Well, there was no bed in this bedroom, but Joe had an airbed in the closet. So instead of calling it a bed and breakfast, they called it an airbed and breakfast. And they created a really simple web page using WordPress, just a blog, to put up an advertisement. They wrote to a number of local bloggers who gave them links, and within a day, they had 3 people who wanted to stay with them. There was a 35-year-old woman from Boston, a father of 4 from Utah, and a man from India. And that weekend, they made not only $1,000, but they showed their guests around the city, and they all went to the conference together and made wonderful friendships. So much so that the man from India invited them to his wedding 2 years later. And so, fast forward a couple months. It's now January 2008, and I had just quit my job. And the 3 of us decided we wanted to start a company together. And the guys told me this story that had happened in October. And we reflected on that, and we said there must be other people and other situations where this concept would be a good idea. And so we set out to build a website. And what we did was actually very simple. It's different than what you see today. But basically, it was a directory of events where locals could put up their spare bedroom just for the event, and those coming in from out of town could look it up and basically give you a phone call. It was a directory. It was a glorified Craigslist, basically. Very simple site. It only took 3 weeks to build, and we decided to launch it for South by Southwest in 2008, March 2008. We thought this is where Twitter had launched a year before. This was where we were going to make our big launch. So we finished the site about a week and a half before the event. We got about a dozen properties on the website, and I think 2 or 3 people might have actually used it. One of which was Brian himself. So Brian flew down to Austin, Texas, and his host picked him up at the airport, brought him to his house, and the guy's wife had made Brian dinner, really nice. The airbed was set up with a chocolate on the pillow. Wonderful hospitality. Well, at the end of the night, the host asked Brian, do you have the money? Because this was before we accepted payment through the website. And so Brian said, oh, I had forgotten to go to the ATM. Can I bring it to you tomorrow? And the guy said, hey, no problem. So the next night, before bed, the host asked Brian again, were you able to get that money for me? And Brian had forgotten, again, to go to the ATM. Now, at this point, the host started to get a little suspicious of Brian. He said, who is this guy that I don't really know, that I met on the internet, who's sleeping on my bed? And the hospitality began to wear off. And we thought to ourselves afterwards, how nice would it be if you could just take care of the money up front? So when you arrive, you can really focus on the hospitality. And so we thought about that. And Paul Graham told us something else. He said it's okay to do things that don't scale. It's counterintuitive a little bit. You're making an internet company. The whole idea is that it's self-serve and it can scale to millions. But he said when you're trying to find that product market fit, it's okay to do things that don't scale. And he asked us, where are your users? And we said, well, our users are everywhere. He said, well, no, where do you have the most users? We said, New York. He said, go to New York and meet all your users, which again was counterintuitive because we had no money. How were we going to buy plane tickets and do all this? He said, figure it out. So over the course of 4 different weekends, we went to New York and we met all of our users. At the time, we only had 20 or 30 hosts in New York, so it wasn't that hard actually. And we noticed something about our hosts. We noticed that they had really bad photos of their properties. This was again in 2008, 2009, and camera phones weren't as good as they are today. So a lot of the photos were low resolution, really dark. And so we would call the hosts up and we'd say, would you like a professional photographer to come to your home and photograph your apartment for free? And people were a little confused, but they said, sure, why not? It's free. And so they got the knock on the door. And who was it? But Joe and Brian, right? The co-founders of the company. So they were a little surprised by that. But they took the pictures with a camera that they had rented. And while they're there, they opened up the website and showed them how to use the website and got product feedback. And then also invited the hosts out to beer later on that night. And so we'd get together, say 10 or so people at a time for beer. And we'd build a relationship, build a rapport, tell them our story, try to make them into our evangelists. And so much so that once we went back to San Francisco, we were able to give them a call and ask them things like, hey, your profile description, it's only a paragraph, and you have a really nice apartment. Do you mind if we write 2 more paragraphs for you? Or you're trying to charge $400 a night. That seems a bit unrealistic to start with. Maybe we could start with $50 a night, and if you get too many inquiries, you can always increase it. So had we not met these people and built a relationship, we would have never been able to ask them that. But because they had heard our story and they wanted us to be successful, they were cooperative. And as a result of taking high-quality photos, lowering the prices, improving the profile descriptions, and just generally getting the host to cooperate with us and wanting us to succeed, suddenly we had a really nice product. And it was at this point that guests from around the world started booking these properties in New York. And so the host started making money. They would tell their friends would come to the site, see the really high bar that was established, and they would emulate that. They would put up their own property and take the good photos, etc. And meanwhile, people were coming from New York from around the world, and then they would go home. And oftentimes, the guests would become hosts themselves. And so very quickly, this idea began to cross-pollinate. And so properties were popping up in Berlin, Barcelona, Hong Kong, all over the world, and suddenly you had a lot more places you could go to. And today it's exploded. There's 600,000 properties in 192 countries, 40,000 different cities, literally everywhere. And those properties are being booked. So it took us 4 years to get our first 4 million guests. But in 2013 alone, we serviced 7 million additional guests for 11 million today. So classic hockey stick growth. And on any given night, there's about 150,000 people staying in other people's homes.